an artwork by Art Basel, who is Russian. It's a pair of monumental canvases, wood. They also look very textured and expressive. Electrical panels used as frames for photographs. That's quite an interesting idea as well. And then there's unreal synergy of various objects. Snails and a sewing machine, a human torso and snails. Snails and... Hello, friends. Today we're going to review the world's largest art fair. We are here in Basel at the Art Basel 2025 exhibition. This year, the event brings together 289 different art galleries from 42 countries. And the art starts right here, from Messeplatz. Here, Katharina Gross has created a wonderful installation called Por. This artwork is what's known as site-specific, meaning it was made especially for this event. It was created just for this place and will only exist while the fair is on, but afterwards it will disappear and remain only in our memories. So, what else can you take away from here in your memory? Let's go and find out. So make yourselves comfortable. There will be a lot of art, and it's going to be very exciting. We'll start with the Unlimited section. Unlimited is an area dedicated to large-scale works. You could even say monumental pieces. These are usually not shown in private collections, but more often in museums. But if you have a large enough house, you could give it a try. You could try displaying some rather charming ones. Angels made from polished steel, with heads crafted from silicone. A playful and somewhat nostalgic musical piece by talented Italian female artists, deeply inspired by the vibrant aesthetics and the enchanting illumination of a traditional festival typically held in southern Italy. There is a work by the Russian-born artist Art Basel. This is also a pair of monumental canvases, you could say a diptych 6x6 with the word forward in the style of Soviet constructivism. A bit of video art. This is quite a meditative piece, to some extent, by a Lebanese artist who turned the process of destruction into a work of art. And in general, this idea of destruction as creation, I really like it. And that's why, by the way, I also like the Portuguese artist known as Vils. With the help of a huge model of a metro entrance, the German artist shows us the illusory nature of the connection provided by these underground transport networks. In other words, it's basically an entrance to nowhere. That's how the German artist thinks. An artist from Miami, originally from Haiti, explores the history of black people and the slave trade. These are rather sensitive topics for his nation, which he addresses through an installation made up of several figures. Each of them is covered with cut-out eyes, and all of this is also accompanied by trees. And, in fact, the human figures themselves are growing from the trees, thus showing their connection to their roots, to the roots of their race and their identity. And there's another rather contemplative piece, which could be translated as everydayness, as in daily life. It's an exploration of human fragility and the resilience. On a huge glass canvas lies a massive chunk of granite. I really liked the work of my favorite, Jaume Plensa. He's a Catalan artist, by the way, whose exhibition I attended in Madrid. It's still running at the moment, so if you happen to be in Madrid, you should definitely go. It's brilliant. Here, he's presenting a piece called Forgotten Dreams. It's made up of 21 aluminium cast doors, with articles from the Declaration of Human Rights printed on them. There are 11 on one side and 10 on the other. And this empty space symbolizes the duality that is inherent in Jaume's work. On the one hand, it's about personal experiences. On the other, it's a call to collective humanity, to the collective mind of humankind. Another very contemplative piece, you could say narrative and highly architectural, is called Atlas. It's made up of 8 models of well-known buildings. These are architectural structures such as the Grand Palais in Paris, the Crystal Palace in London, and the Museum of Tervuren in Brussels. And essentially, They serve as cells, a kind of reflection of colonialism and, in fact, the cells found in bourgeois houses. In the 19th century, they were used to display something exotic, some exotic animals. And here, the artist draws attention precisely to this colonial past, to the oppression of peoples, to the exploitation of their land and resources. And probably that's exactly why these cages were forged in Côte d'Ivoire. But a large-scale igloo, the traditional dwelling of the northern, very northern peoples, decorated with shards of car windows and even a car door, speaks to us of the hopelessness of industrial civilization. And this supersized installation is called Voyage, or March to Utopia. It consists of 80 works of art, all of them in one way or another connected with movement. That is, they either have some means of transportation or represent something in motion. And here, everyone and everything is gathered. Each participant in this parade is moving towards a better future, or perhaps, on the contrary, moving towards nowhere. It really is impressive, and of course, I really like this kind of, indeed, the narrative, when a work is also brought together into some kind of collective exhibition, and in doing so, it presents some new idea. As we already learned at the beginning, there are works of art that are created specifically for a place. But it turns out there are works which, as the artist claims, actually create the place themselves. And this place can be created with the help of thrones, which are a set of 100 logs made from red Canadian cedar. And indeed, the work is very graphic, and depending on how it is arranged, it is possible to create that very place. In the same way, I think, the work I loosely translated as Time Shift also creates a place. It is a curved wall with repeating lines of ocean waves, and such sculptures protruding from this wall, made from natural marble, coral, leaf, and cactus. By the way, the marble triptych Rose Aurora also looks quite striking, although in some places it might be a bit too anatomical. There, such unrealistic synergies of various objects are explored: snails and a sewing machine, a human torso and snails, and an image of intestines. As someone who grew up on Jules Verne's novels, I, of course, really liked the installation by the artist Arman, which is called Captain Nemo. It should be said that this is what he created during his lifetime. Not that many works, but all of them are very large and expressive. And this inspiration comes from those very Jules Verne novels that were written during the Industrial Revolution. It was made from equipment taken from the former Fragonard perfume factory, so everything is real and as authentic as possible. Heinz Mack's Mechanical Ballet is, of course, an utterly mesmerizing piece. I really love these kinds of kinetic and optical things. And as for optics, there's quite an interesting labyrinth, Transchromia, which specifically explores the change of color depending on the overlay of different colors. It's also to some extent an interactive piece, considering that both adults and children wander through this labyrinth. A monumental composition of 20 testimony totems, made from volcanic tuff. It also looks as archaic and as convincing as possible. The huge midnight sculpture looks especially convincing. Despite being made of metal, it somehow has a sense of lightness. And then there's Dan's marker. There's even a slight feeling of revulsion, but nevertheless, the curators say that it can also be combined with attraction. Once again, this is a site-specific work by a British artist, made from horsehair and wood found in the artist's homeland. So, what provokes a stronger reaction in you, revulsion or attraction? Let us know in the comments. In the second pavilion, galleries are presented. These are private art galleries from different countries and cities, each showcasing a particular curatorial project. They are all completely different, With diverse media, here you'll find painting, photography, sculpture, and different techniques and styles. And here too, there is a classification. For example, right behind me is an area called feature. Feature refers to selections, collections. These showcase masters of the 20th century. Here you'll find quite famous names, but rather unknown works by these artists. This includes Andy Warhol, Donald Judd, Louise Bourgeois, and even Picasso. All in all, it's genuinely interesting to pay attention to some perhaps not so widely advertised or popularized works by these rather well-known 20th century artists. There's also a small section called the cabinet. It's dedicated to some special curatorial projects. Their essence is quite hard to grasp, but nevertheless, the works themselves are rather remarkable. Well, I traditionally like David Hockney. In another gallery, one of the works from an entire series is on display. These are exercise machines where ancient sculptures serve as the weights, and here, in particular, is one of them. It's shown for training triceps and biceps with the head of Zeus. It really is something special, a rather unusual statement of sorts. It should be said that the works presented in Vermilion only belong to some of the galleries represented here. Here, in the main exhibition space, they have a special sign indicating this. So, accordingly, you can match up who brought what here. And as for those large-scale objects presented in Lyon Unlimited, some works from these same series are shown here on a more human scale. For example, the very same one. Nicola Turner, the artist behind the sculpture made of horsehair and wood, is represented here in a smaller scale. And Eric Bulatov also has some smaller works, although their statements might even be more compelling. My personal preferences have always leaned towards art that borders on craft, on handiwork. That is, things like weaving practices, tapestries, ceramics, working with marble. I think there's something genuinely interior about it. Among the famous masters, Michelangelo Pistoletto also works here, but again, he is someone I personally really like. I really like him, personally. It truly is poor art, but no less expressive for it. These are mirrored panels with applique. There's also a rather small work by Alexander Calder, whom we've come across several times already, both in the background of Cyrillish and during our recent trip to Louisiana, in Denmark. So I recommend checking out both, because Calder is very interesting and truly unique. And of course, as always, I can't help but mention, there's some really good work with lighting at certain stands. A good light can add 20 to 30% to the value of a work of art. I'm absolutely convinced of that. I still have rather mixed feelings about ready-mades. On the one hand, conceptually it's all very impressive and interesting, but on the other hand, in principle, any regular product can be called a work of art. The main thing is to come up with a concept for it. On the other hand, buying a radiator and perceiving it as art on stage also seems like quite a good idea to me. Another thing I liked was Tom Wesselmann. It's a kind of figurative painting, but the interesting thing is that the shape of the canvas itself mirrors the figure depicted on it. Keith Haring has some rather interesting work. That is, again, it's quite primitive in terms of technique, but that doesn't make it any less expressive. It's painting on banner fabric, and also very architectural. There are architectural Portuguese towers at the London Gallery. The piece is recent, author unknown. It looks decorative, suited for interiors. There's an entirely new section at Art Basel called Premieres. As the name suggests, this is where the latest art projects are showcased. These are solo exhibitions, dedicated to a single artist or their works, although there are also some slightly mixed curatorial projects here, featuring 2 or 3 artists. I can't say that anything really struck me deeply, but nevertheless, this is the place where you can track the very freshest trends for yourself. And the last section we'll pay attention to is called Statements. And here, 18 artists are expressing themselves, 18 rather interesting exhibitions, possibly the most interesting at this fair, at least for me. These are rising stars, meaning young or relatively young artists. Artists who, you could say, are laureates of the Blues Art Prize. And indeed, everything here is very concentrated and very convincing. For me, it's hard to put into words, but almost everything here resonates with me, especially these acoustic installations by Abbas Zaidi. By the way, I first encountered them at Tate Modern. This tree here also looks very textured and expressive. Electrical panels used as frames for slides or photographs, that's also quite an interesting idea, I think. And kinetic art is, as always, absolutely mesmerizing. Friends, I have to say, I'm really impressed. This is truly something. It's definitely worth a visit, at least once in your life, especially if you have any interest in contemporary art. And one more thought. When I was at Tate Modern in London, I came to the conclusion that most major contemporary museums, by and large, showcase pretty much the same. A collection of rather well-known, serious, and very expensive artists. The works vary in how impressive they are, but still, more or less, the lineup of these artists is pretty much the same. But here, it's one discovery after another. There are so many interesting artists, both emerging and established. The classics are present too, but perhaps with rarer, less well-known works. And because of that, maybe even, they're a bit more interesting than those overhyped, over-publicized pieces that absolutely everyone knows. I think this is worth sharing with your friends. If you enjoyed it, leave a nice comment and give it a big like. Or even better, do both at once. Because this was brilliant. Well, I'll see you at the next design event or art show. Events, because Art Basel is not the only venue during Basel Art Week.